The greatest fear was the unknown. What was happening behind the door? Heather didn't know. Silence. Some distant sounds, voices. But she couldn't make out any words. It seemed like a woman was speaking. Dear God, how is Mom doing? What about Dad? How did it even happen that she's sitting locked in a pantry? Under the dim light bulb, Heather bitterly smirked. At least she won't die of hunger. Dad loved to stock up on supplies and made sure all shelves were filled. There were enough canned goods to last at least half a year. And then, it seems, they'd have to resort to eating dry grains. Because she couldn't break down the door. Dad again installed that steel door with a lock. What to do? His thoroughness showed in everything. As if he were preparing for situations like this. Heather sat on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees. If everything ended well, she would definitely talk to Dad about this cursed pantry and demand that he remove that darn door. Suddenly, the door opened slowly. Odd. Heather didn't even hear someone outside inserting a key into the lock. She huddled deeper into the corner and grabbed the first thing she could find on the shelf. A jar of pickles. Heather was ready to throw it at whoever decided to disturb her solitude. If it wasn't Mom, Dad, or Deborah, her aunt. And then she saw him. The man with a scar on his cheek. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and confusion. So, want to get out? Heather slowly stood up, still holding the jar in her hand. Don't move. A female voice sounded. Deborah's voice. She stood behind the scarred man, holding something in her hands. And suddenly, it became dark. A foolish thought flashed through Heather's mind. Could the last thing she ever saw be a can of green peas standing on the shelf next to her in the pantry? A year ago. Heather, did you buy peas or did you forget again? Rachel, Heather's mother, frowned. I don't see it anywhere. Heather, slicing boiled potatoes, shrugged. I bought it. Dad must have put it somewhere. Ask him. Mom, you know he's in charge of supplies. I didn't put anything anywhere. Vince looked sternly at his daughter. But this sternness was not at all intimidating, rather affectionate. Vince never knew how to be angry. Rachel deliberately waved her hand. All right. Don't argue. Okay. It's such a day. Vince, confess where the peas are, and I won't bother you. Heather laughed at her mother's words. She adored her parents. Both were over 60, but they seemed so young, just as they were in her childhood. And they didn't feel old themselves. Dad skied in the woods every weekend. Mom practiced yoga, painted some incomprehensible abstract paintings, so enthusiastically that Heather could only envy. She turned 30, and she still hadn't found herself. Of course, Heather had a job. She taught music to children. Once she wanted to become a famous musician and tour the world, but quickly realized she didn't have any special talent. However, she graduated from the conservatory, so there wasn't much choice. Either retrain or work in a seemingly unnecessary profession. A violinist. Quite funny to think about. The most needed profession in the world. Of course. All right. Melissa will be here in 2 hours. Rachel sighed, looking at her husband. And our table isn't set. And nothing's ready. Only the hot dishes. Yes, but the hot dishes will be cold in 2 hours. Vince remarked. So you're a bit hasty. We'll reheat it. Dear, Rachel frowned. Mom, why are you so worried? Heather smiled at her mother. Melissa isn't marrying a prince. Maybe these relationships won't even lead to marriage. Rachel nervously smoothed the apron with embroidered flowers. A gift from Heather's grandmother. But still, we have to try. Melissa says he's the one. I want to make a good impression. Vince, my goodness, you're a chef. And you cut the carrots wrong. What's that? Rachel took the knife from her husband and started cutting the carrots into neat cubes. I just don't belong in this kitchen. Vince sighed. I'll go watch TV. No. Come on. Help. Rachel said. Get the plates, a towel, and wipe them so they're clean. I can't trust you with anything. Heather finished cutting the potatoes and began peeling eggs for the salad. Poor Mom. She worries as if royalty is coming over. And it's just Melissa's fiancé. Though you can understand Mom, she's deeply concerned about Melissa. Melissa's life hasn't been easy. She had 2 serious romances, and both ended, to put it mildly, badly. It wasn't customary in their family to dwell on these matters. Melissa's first husband, Ben, robbed Vince, his father-in-law, and disappeared with a significant portion of the family savings in an unknown direction. Heather didn't like him from the start. Ben seemed to try to please everyone, pretending. Everyone noticed it except Melissa. She loved him with all her heart, practically worshipped him, and all he wanted was their money. They never found Ben. Apparently he managed to change documents or left the country altogether. It was a serious blow for the family. Melissa took 2 years to recover from it, and her father's business suffered losses, almost going bankrupt. When Melissa somewhat recovered, she met Nate. Heather liked him more than Ben. A nice guy, interesting, wrote texts for advertising agencies. He planned to become a writer and create detective stories. Nate lived with Melissa for a year, and then he cheated on her with her best friend. He tried to justify himself, claiming he's a creative person. He needs variety. But Melissa wasn't ready for such diversity. She kicked Nate out, first deleting all his records from the hard drive of his laptop. Heather considered revenge unworthy, but she still approved of her sister's action. Let him come up with his slogans and novels again, there's his variety. For a while, Nate tried to win Melissa back, waited outside the house with flowers, wrote long emotional letters about his still burning feelings. And then he met a new love and forgot about Melissa. She was terribly hurt by him. Perhaps she wanted to torment him and still get back to him by forgiving the betrayal. But fortunately, such a chance did not present itself. Heather was very glad about that. She believed that if a man starts cheating, he won't stop, especially if you forgive him. And now, a third significant love entered Melissa's life. This love was named Arthur. Melissa met him online, but only Heather knew about it. Parents believed that the internet was a bad place to find a spouse, so Melissa had to keep this fact hidden from them. According to Melissa, Arthur embodied all possible male virtues: kind, generous, wealthy, and handsome. Heather understood that her sister was in love. Melissa started talking more and more about the wedding, even planning the colors for the nursery. Today, Melissa finally decided to introduce her chosen one to her family, and Mom was terribly nervous. Understandably so. She got married early herself and worried that her daughters were still single. Melissa was already 33, and she was still unmarried. Heather tried to reassure her mother, repeating that times had changed, and it wasn't unusual for a 40-year-old woman to be single. But Rachel wasn't convinced. She believed that one should get married before 25, and the fact that both her daughters didn't fit this schedule she considered her own failure. Sometimes Heather even felt embarrassed in front of her mother. No, she had no intention of getting married. She hadn't met the one with whom she wanted to share her life, but it was challenging to feel like a parental disappointment. However, marrying the first person who came along just to please her mother wasn't something Heather was ready for. She was quite content with the life she lived. Her small apartment, cramped but cozy. It was her bachelor pad filled with books, knitting, soft toys, and crafts gifted by her students. A man just didn't fit into this picture. Heather didn't want her little world to crumble, where everything was in its place, and, in her opinion, nothing was superfluous. Melissa, Heather's sister, really wanted to get married, and it seemed like a worthy candidate had appeared. However, for some reason, Rachel had convinced herself that the fate of her elder daughter depended on whether Arthur liked the salad she had prepared. And the main course, of course. Yesterday, the three of them did a thorough cleaning since Rachel and Vince lived in a 2-story cottage, and Rachel preferred to do the cleaning herself. No cleaning services for her. Strangers in the house? Absolutely not. So, Heather had to wash windows, clean the floors, and polish the faucets in the bathroom. just to make sure Arthur, whom she had already pre-hated, liked it. If he loves her sister Melissa, he should be indifferent to the cleanliness of her parents' house, right? But Mom didn't agree. Everything had to be perfect. Period. Finally, the salad was cut, and Heather put it in the refrigerator. And why did Mom choose potato salad? She could have come up with something more refined. After all, Dad was still a chef. He had been cooking or organizing the cooking process his entire life. He had been in the culinary business for 6 years, created his own business, opened his restaurant, and still catered to almost all weddings and corporate events in the city, delivering ready-made food. And now, Heather had to cook for Arthur. Where's the justice? But even here, Rachel was adamant. They had to set the damn table themselves to demonstrate how strong and united their family was. Heather didn't want to argue with her mother. It usually ended badly. No one could argue with Mom, not even Dad, whom all subordinates feared, slightly feared his wife, and did everything she demanded. All right, 3 salads to go, Rachel said, with pomegranate, pineapple, and something else. I forgot. With truffles, Heather suggested. Mom, maybe let's calm down and take a breath. We won't eat all of this anyway. And if we run out, we can always order pizza. You're playing with fire. Dad muttered quietly, looking at his daughter with a slight smirk. Fortunately, Rachel didn't hear his words. Pizza? You must be out of your mind. Bring out the pineapples. I put them in the fridge. And slice them. But do it carefully, not like you usually do. Heather glanced at her dad and rolled her eyes. Vince shrugged. And Heather, it's important. When you bring a fiancé home, and I hope it happens, I'll do the same for you. Mom sadly looked at her daughter. But I'm afraid I won't live to see that. Mom, don't start, Heather said. If I meet someone, there's no need to cook anything. I'll just bring pizza myself. And no need to clean the house either. You know, you don't need anything. The mother looked disapprovingly at her daughter. I'm trying, and no one appreciates it. Her words were interrupted by the doorbell. Why so early? Heather wondered. Melissa would have warned us. I don't know. Rachel threw a towel over her shoulder sharply. Well, because of you, we didn't finish in time. Mom, I'll open it. I'll try to keep them occupied while you finish the salads. I promise. Heather quickly went to the hall. Sometimes Mom becomes unbearable. It's amazing that Dad manages to endure her 24/7. Heather opened the door, expecting to see Melissa and her boyfriend. But it wasn't them. A beautiful woman, Heather's age, stood on the doorstep. Tall, dressed in a snowy white fur coat and a wide-brimmed felt hat adorned with ribbons. The woman smiled at Heather. Hello. She smiled. Don't you recognize me? Heather squinted. The woman's face seemed painfully familiar. Aunt Deborah, thank God. You recognized me. Deborah said, Are Mom and Dad home? By any chance? Yes, of course, they're home. Heather nodded. I came without luggage. I left it in storage. Deborah took off her coat, revealing an elegant knee-length dark blue dress. I understand I came unexpectedly. Yesterday I couldn't reach Rachel. And I don't have your dad's phone, she explained. Deborah, what are you doing here? Rachel appeared in the hall. Why didn't you give us a heads up? I tried. Deborah shrugged. But you were unreachable. And I had nowhere else to go. Rachel frowned. What happened? Deborah adjusted her hair in the mirror, then shook her head, letting her long blonde hair cascade down her shoulders dramatically. The love boat crashed. She sighed. Crashed? Heather asked. Yes, crashed, confirmed Deborah. Jerry said I wasn't the one for him. So, I decided to return to the family. Can I count on a place to stay and some lunch? Of course, Rachel nodded. As always, won't lead to anything good. You're right, Rachel, as always. So, feed me at least. Deborah looked plaintively at her sister. Sure, let's go to the kitchen. Rachel waved her hand, And here we are waiting for Melissa with her fiancé. Rachel uttered the last sentence with pride, as her daughter was soon to get married. Life well lived indeed. Heather struggled to hold back her laughter. What an achievement, finding a spouse. Well, great, Deborah muttered. Heather, give me something. I want to change. Let's go. Heather nodded to her aunt. They headed to the room, traditionally considered Heather's. Although she didn't live with her parents, this room was always set aside for her when she visited. Deborah took Heather's arm. Don't think anything bad, Heather. I feel awkward myself. Where else could I go? No worries. It's just that Mom has been off since this morning. Worrying. What if we don't impress this Arthur, and he dumps our Melissa? He'll be impressed. Deborah chuckled. Who wouldn't like a bride with such parents? It's just awful, Heather complained. We're cutting salads, and yesterday we cleaned the house to a shine, as if he's not a fiancé but a health inspector. Heather, just ignore it. Deborah sighed. Rachel has always been like that. I wonder how you and Melissa turned out normal. Probably took after your dad, Vince. Heather chuckled. Indeed. It wasn't easy to maintain one's sanity with such a mother. Rachel always cared about every detail, ensuring that her daughter's closets and tables were in perfect order. She could create a scandal if Melissa or Heather didn't use a knife during dinner and instead poked at fried meat only with a fork. It's strange that Deborah isn't so much like her. Although not surprising, Deborah was younger than Heather. In their childhood, they spent a lot of time together, trips to their grandparents' house outside the city. To Rachel and Deborah's parents, they ran to the lake, dug in the soil pretending to be archaeologists, played hide and seek and tag. When Deborah turned 12, her parents, Heather's grandparents, moved to another city. Communication was interrupted. Deborah entered Heather's life 3 years ago. At that time, she met her Brendan and seriously planned to marry him. But apparently, something didn't work out. Heather often pondered over the fact that her family was quite unusual. Not like others. Who else has an aunt younger than you are, whose grandparents decided to radically change their lives and move at the age of 60 to the far north to live in a village closer to nature? Well, probably no one. Although Heather sincerely adored her grandparents and considered them the most unusual and interesting people in the world. Her grandfather, Robert Wilson, was a renowned geologist. He even wrote a textbook that students still study from. By the way, it was thanks to this textbook that he became wealthy. The book was published in several languages, with new editions constantly being released. Robert traveled around the world, visiting Africa and the North Pole. Heather could listen to his stories for hours, mouth agape and holding her breath. Grandmother Annette was an opera singer, and not just any, but an extraordinary one. She sang beautifully. In the evenings, she would sit at the piano and perform arias from the great operas or simply sing. Rachel, the first daughter of Annette and Robert, was born shortly after their wedding. Robert was 20 at the time, and Annette was 2 years younger. As for the second daughter, Deborah, she was born when Rachel was in her 30s. Rachel was dissatisfied with her parents' decision, believing it wasn't worth risking health. She often recounted how she tried to dissuade her mother and father, but they were adamant. Annette had a smooth pregnancy. She joked that the second pregnancy was even easier than the first. No morning sickness, no swelling, just the joyful anticipation of a miracle. So, Heather's aunt, Deborah, came into the world. Deborah was truly a miracle. Heather adored her. Bright, curious, and open, she quickly became Heather's best friend, although Heather herself was the complete opposite. She often struggled with her own shyness and had a profound fear of strangers. In contrast, Deborah was outgoing, confident, and irresistibly charming, traits she retained forever. Moreover, Deborah was incredibly beautiful. Heather even envied her in childhood. Big blue eyes, light hair, porcelain skin. People said Deborah resembled her mother in her youth, and Heather agreed. Looking at grandmother's photos, she felt like she was seeing her aunt. Deborah's older sister, Rachel, believed that Deborah's appearance was what hindered her. Rachel didn't love her sister enough, perhaps feeling jealousy or just a slight tinge of envy. Yet, at times, Heather felt that her mother might be onto something. Deborah received an excellent education. Her parents had the means to afford the best tutors. They enrolled her in a language-focused school, and after graduating, she pursued studies in translation. However, Deborah didn't work in her field. She dreamt of marrying well, and towards that goal, she marched forward, seemingly oblivious to any obstacles. First came Stephen, then Tim, and later Jerry. Rachel constantly narrated the exploits of her sister Deborah, using her as an example of what not to do. Heather listened to these stories with interest and some sympathy for her aunt's fate. Her life seemed like a captivating TV series. Stephen turned out to be a criminal, Tim a bigamist. While Deborah could tolerate having one wife around, the second seemed excessive. Eventually, she escaped from Jerry. As it turned out, in Heather's room, Deborah sank onto the bed with a sigh. "I'm so tired. And I'm broke. What should I do?" "What happened?" Heather asked, opening the closet. "Let's see. What fits you? You're taller and much slimmer." Nothing much, Heather. Just had a fight." Deborah smiled, but her smile seemed forced. Heather pulled out roomy knit pants and a white t-shirt. "Will this do?" "It will," Deborah said indifferently, looking at the clothes. "Heather, why does everything end up like this?" "How?" Heather sat down beside her. "Is there something I can do to help?" "Well, what can you do?" Deborah waved her hand. "Once again, I'm left alone like a fool. I believed so much that everything would work out. He promised so much, courted me so beautifully." And then Heather suddenly noticed a bruise on Deborah's arm, a dark crimson mark, as if someone had grabbed her arm with all their strength. Catching Heather's gaze, she pulled up the sleeve of her dress. "Ouch." "Yeah," she sighed. "The scoundrel. You know, and you want to know why, Heather. He thought I was eyeing another man at the restaurant. We came home, and it started. He was hitting you." Heather gasped. Deborah nodded. "Before that, just threats. I thought it would pass, but no. Well, anyway, I left right away. I can't endure such things, even for more money. It's a shame, Heather. I thought he was a good guy, just has an explosive temper. But an explosive temper is not a sign of manliness. It's a sign of an inability to control oneself." "Poor thing." Heather hugged her aunt's shoulders. "What a nightmare. Good thing you left." "Why is it good?" Deborah wrinkled her nose. "Nowhere to go. Only back to my parents in the boonies. Or linger at this place. But Rachel, I think, won't be thrilled." "Well, you can stay with me," Heather suggested. "I don't have much space, but there's a fouled-out chair. You can sleep there." "Listen, I don't want to be intrusive." Deborah turned away and looked out the window. "But still, maybe I'll take you up on that offer." "All right. Let me take a shower at least before my second niece arrives with her beloved." "Can I?" "Of course, you can." Heather nodded. "The shower is behind that door. Clean towels are in the cabinet." Deborah smiled, kissed Heather on the cheek, and went into the bathroom. Unexpectedly, Heather felt sorry for her. Why does everything happen to her like this? Beautiful, smart, but no happiness. Although Heather wasn't particularly attractive or exceptionally smart, she didn't have a line of suitors. Apparently, the secret lay elsewhere. If only she could understand where. "Heather, where are you?" Rachel shouted from the kitchen. Heather sighed and went to help her mother. Rachel was preparing some salad. "Why did she come today?" the woman asked her daughter. "Couldn't she wait until tomorrow to part with her man?" "Probably not," Heather replied, transferring dirty dishes from the sink to the dishwasher. "But the whole family is together, Mom. Isn't that a good thing?" "Heather, you know what kind of lifestyle she leads. Rachel lowered her voice, as if afraid Deborah might overhear them through the door. What will Arthur think? Well, I think Deborah won't talk about her lifestyle. Heather looked at her mother. Enough, Mom, everything will be fine. Everything will be fine. And what if we disappoint Melissa? Who will be to blame? Rachel shook her head. By the way, this Arthur is from a good family. Heather nodded. Yes, she had heard enough about Arthur's family. A hereditary diplomat born in Sweden, moved as a teenager, fluent in Swedish, graduated from a prestigious university. Curious, why was Arthur in their town? Why didn't he stay in a bigger city? Well, whatever. Come on, go set the table already. Heather interrupted her thoughts. Put this salad in the center and check that all the forks are laid out. Dad always forgets. Heather went to the living room. Her father was sitting in the armchair, reading a magazine. Vince warmly smiled at his daughter. So, has Mom not had a heart attack from worry yet? Mom is holding up. Heather placed the salad on the table and sat on the arm of the chair, hugging her father's neck. If I find a fiancé, Dad, I won't invite him here for anything. I might just get married secretly on a deserted island. Don't be mad at Mom. Vince kissed his daughter on the cheek. She's worried. She wants everything to work out well for Melissa. Half an hour later, the table was set. Deborah helped and tried to joke and cheer up her sister Rachel, who responded with obvious irritation. Heather couldn't help but feel sorry for her aunt. Poor thing. It must be hard for her to face such family treatment. As always, their father kept his distance and tried not to get in trouble with his wife. Finally, Melissa and Arthur arrived. Arthur exceeded all expectations. Well built, with a Hollywood-worthy radiant smile, dressed in a perfectly tailored black wool coat. He looked like he stepped out of a men's fashion boutique advertisement. Suddenly, Heather felt like he was cut out from a fashion brochure and pasted into real life. She immediately felt somewhat awkward and absurd. On the other hand, Heather's sister, Melissa, was glowing with happiness. The smile never left her face, and anyone could understand why. Every woman dreams of a man like him, and Melissa got him. Come in. Come in. Rachel smiled. Very nice to meet you. We didn't prepare much. We just wanted it to be a family gathering. Heather's father nudged her elbow and raised his eyebrows expressively. Hi, niece. Deborah hugged Melissa. You've become even more beautiful. Oh, and you came. Melissa kissed her aunt on the cheek. Unexpected. Deborah. What a surprise. Yes, Deborah decided to surprise us all. Rachel sighed. Well, since everyone is here, let's sit at the table. Whatever God sent. Simple food. Every day we eat like this. Ah, Heather nodded at the table. Melissa couldn't take her admiring eyes off Arthur. She looked silly and very much in love. But that wasn't surprising. Men like Arthur usually appeal to women without much effort. A smile is all it takes, and any woman is at his feet. Heather wondered why he chose Melissa. She considered her sister cute and somewhat interesting, but not someone she'd call a beauty. Short, a bit plump, with a round, good-natured face, she resembled more of a kindergarten teacher than a fatal seductress. But Arthur apparently saw something Heather didn't. Eat salads, everyone. Rachel busied herself. Arthur, you work as a manager, right? Well, yes. Arthur smiled brightly. I can't complain about work. They pay well, but I'm thinking of starting my own business. Oh. Arthur wants to open his real estate agency. Melissa looked at her fiancé adoringly. The best in town, right? Arthur, of course, my dear. He covered her hand with his. I'll do my best. And you, Heather, what do you do? Melissa said you're a musician. Yes, violin. Heather nodded. I also teach. Yes, a wonderful profession. Rachel agreed. Heather is very talented. Since childhood. Is that so? Won't you play something for us? Heather rolled her eyes. If you're a doctor, people expect health advice. If you're a programmer, they'll ask you to reinstall the operating system or clean their computer from viruses. And if you're a musician, you must entertain. Heather couldn't stand it since childhood. Her mother loved to drag her to the center of the room to play the violin for guests. In those moments, Heather wanted to disappear through the floor. She intentionally played badly and out of tune. But it turned out no one noticed. "Well, maybe," Heather said. "Sis, come on," Melissa said. "Arthur loves music, especially classical. And I love it too. Hardly anyone listens to classical music nowadays." Arthur nodded. "Yes, I can't stand modern music. I think it makes you dumber." The conversation flowed quite smoothly. Arthur boasted about his achievements and virtues, and Melissa nodded approvingly, radiating with pride. Rachel seemed on the verge of breaking into a dance. A groom like Arthur was beyond her wildest dreams for her daughter. Heather felt a bit uncomfortable. She pitied Melissa. Somehow, Mother always saw her as the unsuccessful daughter, not attractive enough, not educated enough. Melissa struggled to get into college, majoring in philology, and her academic performance was mediocre. Sciences were never her forte. She dreamt of sewing clothes, and she was quite good at it. However, the mere thought of transferring to another college terrified Rachel, and Melissa lacked the character to argue with her mother. As a result, Melissa forgot about her dream of owning her own studio. After college, she landed a job as an editor at the local newspaper. She didn't secure the position on her own. Her father had to intervene to get her the available position. Her mother hoped that at least her daughters would find good husbands. However, even in this aspect, disappointment awaited her. Heather had no rush to get married. She had a couple of romances that fizzled out on their own. Heather decided she would wait. If the right person came along, then she would consider marriage. And if not, well, Heather was content with her life as it was. On the other hand, Melissa wanted to get married, but none of the candidates satisfied Rachel. They either earned too little, looked scary, or raised concerns about the potential grandchildren. Melissa obediently parted ways with men who didn't meet her mother's approval. Finally, she met Arthur. He was exactly what Rachel wanted, ideal in every aspect. Now, the only hope was that Melissa would be happy with him. Heather decided that she needed to talk to her sister. Unbelievable. She didn't even know how Melissa met her fiancé. For some reason, they rarely communicated in recent years. It seemed like they didn't argue, but they suddenly became strangers to each other. After dinner, Rachel suggested that Melissa show Arthur around the house. The oldest daughter led her fiancé to the second floor, a satisfied smile never leaving her face. When Melissa and Arthur disappeared, Rachel looked at everyone present with a smile. "Well," she said, "he's quite something, isn't he?" "Yeah, not bad," shrugged her father. "Just a bit. I don't know. Polished, perhaps." Yeah, nodded Deborah. "Looks like a robot. Too perfect. And you should stay quiet." Rachel pursed her lips, glancing at her sister. "With your, what's wrong with mine?" Deborah frowned. "Rachel, it's still my business." "It's your business. But you come running to live with us." Rachel crossed her arms and squinted spitefully. "Mom, please." Heather approached her mother, embracing her, trying to calm her down. "So, it's such a day. Melissa is so happy over there. She'll come back, and we'll all fight." Why? You should take an example from Melissa. Proudly raised her chin. "Normal people should set an example. What am I supposed to do with you? How old are you? And you are still single. Remember my words, Heather. You'll end up alone, and we, with your father, won't last forever." "That's it," sighed Vince. "Daughter, I would have brought someone in your place already to calm Mom's nerves." "You wouldn't understand. You don't care, Vince, about your daughters. And you, Deborah, set a bad example too." Rachel raised her hands to the ceiling in despair. Rachel looked at Heather again and went to the table to clear the plates. After a moment of thought, her sister Deborah joined her. As for Heather, she just wanted this day to end as soon as possible. She already hated Arthur. Now her mom would surely use him as an example of the perfect man. Of course, Heather had to find something similar, or even better. Melissa set the bar high. No doubt, in 14 minutes, Melissa and Arthur descended into the living room. Judging by Melissa's slightly disheveled hairstyle, they managed not only to inspect the second floor. "So, how did you like it?" Rachel beamed at the sight of Arthur. "Modest, of course, but did our best," her father said. "A beautiful house." Arthur pulled Melissa to him. "I hope we'll have something similar someday. Right, darling?" "Yes." Melissa giggled foolishly. "But it's time for us to go." Finally releasing himself from his pride, Arthur approached Rachel, slightly bowed, and kissed her hand. "It was very nice to meet you." Rachel lowered her eyes and blushed. "Oh no, Arthur, it's an honor for us." "Yes, an honor for us," mumbled Vince. Seeing off Arthur and Melissa, everyone dispersed to their rooms. Deborah asked to stay with Heather, whispering in her ear that she would like to spend time with a reasonable person. And, of course, Heather couldn't refuse her aunt. She had truly missed her. In the room, they changed into pajamas and settled onto the beds to chat. Rachel was quite worked up. Deborah laughed. "I thought she wouldn't let Arthur go until he officially proposed to Melissa right then and there. What if he changes his mind?" "Right, well, that's our mom for you," Heather mused, looking thoughtfully out the window. "She just wants happiness for us. You know, it's just, her idea of happiness is a bit unique." "Yeah. Listen, Heather, I didn't like him at all," Deborah said. "Fake. As if he played a role." "Oh, come on. Maybe he was just nervous." Heather smiled. "You know, first meeting, everyone's a bit of an actor, trying to appear better than they are. It's natural." Still, Deborah frowned. "There's something off about him. Remember my words, Heather." Heather did remember Deborah's words. There was something about Arthur. Yet, she couldn't quite put her finger on it. 2 days later, Heather returned home to her apartment. Deborah went with her. She didn't want to stay at her sister's house. According to her, Rachel would eat her brain with a small teaspoon and wouldn't calm down until she finished it. Heather was inclined to agree. Heather went back to work, and her Aunt Deborah also kept herself busy by translating some articles on request. They didn't talk about Jerry, the man Deborah recently broke up with. Heather gathered that he not only hurt Deborah emotionally, but also might have been involved in some criminal activities. Things Deborah didn't want to get into. Some evenings, Deborah would fall into a melancholic mood. "I'm unlucky," she repeated. "Heather, what's wrong with me?" "Nothing's wrong," Heather replied. "It's just, well, maybe you've been a bit unlucky. I envy my sister. She found Vince and is happily living with him. Good for Rachel. I'd like that too. Our parents as well. They met when Mom was 17, and she immediately fell in love with Dad. She says she knew there was no need to search further. I want someone to look at me with the same loving gaze." "Well, maybe it's not like that for everyone, Deborah," Heather argued. "For some, it happens right away. But for others, it takes a bit of searching." "I'm tired of searching," Deborah said sadly. "Maybe it's enough. Not everyone is as lucky as my sister or yours." Heather often thought about her sister. She called her and suggested meeting up, but Melissa always had excuses. Either she was busy at work or promised Arthur to spend time with him. And Heather accepted it. What could she do? Her sister was in love, as if Arthur had enchanted her. "Well, it will pass. Once the hormones settle, then we'll manage to meet up." But something troubled Heather. She couldn't quite figure out what it was. She should be happy for her sister, but for some reason, the thought of Arthur made her feel a bit uneasy. Deborah felt the same way. She referred to Arthur as plastic and fake. "You know," she laughed, "my dad, your grandpa, says about such people, they wear a cross around their neck, but leather underwear." I think this Arthur is exactly like that. Deborah, the main thing is that Melissa likes him, Heather replied. We don't live in the Middle Ages. If she wants to, she can get a divorce. A month later, Melissa and Arthur got married. Vince covered the wedding expenses. It was his gift to his daughter and her husband. The night before the wedding, Rachel almost went insane, or at least that's how it seemed to Heather. Rachel wanted everything to be perfect, and she tormented her husband, sister, and daughter about what would be on the tables. How to decorate the hall better. Would there be enough champagne? Did Melissa choose too modest a dress? Vince stoically dealt with his wife's anxieties. Occasionally, he would call Heather to complain and ask for temporary refuge at his daughter's place. Heather provided refuge, and her father would come to the city, telling his wife that urgent work matters had come up. At Heather's, he would sit in a chair, read magazines and newspapers, and smoke his favorite pipe. Your mom is a typhoon named Rachel, he sighed. Leaves no one alive in her path. Today, she decided that we should order oysters. Good Lord, what is this all about? Why oysters? Why? Because only the best for the kids, Vince shrugged. Girls, what do you think? If I hire a hitman for this Arthur, and the wedding gets cancelled because of it, would I be justified in court? Definitely. Heather and Deborah replied in unison. Finally, the solemn day arrived. Heather had to admit that the wedding turned out splendid. The hall was tastefully decorated, with many fresh flowers and none of those tacky balloons with congratulations or paper doves. Live music also added to the atmosphere, especially if you didn't think about how much money her father had paid the musicians for their performance. Melissa looked stunning. Heather had never seen her so beautiful before. Whether it was love doing its magic or the efforts of the makeup artists, Heather couldn't tell. But when Heather saw her sister, tears welled up in her eyes. Perhaps Arthur wasn't that bad after all. With him, Melissa simply blossomed. Maybe she and Deborah were just making things up out of envy. After the ceremony, everyone gathered at the restaurant. There were dances, toasts, congratulations, and Heather sincerely rejoiced for her sister. Arthur, it seemed, was quite content with what was happening. At some point, Heather was talking to Deborah. They didn't even notice when Melissa approached them. Girls, have you seen my husband? She asked. No, niece, we haven't, Deborah exclaimed. What? Did he run away already? Isn't it too early? Gone somewhere, and he's not showing up. We're about to dance soon. The first dance. I spent so much time choosing the music. We rehearsed. And he's not here. Melissa frowned. Well, maybe he went for a smoke, Deborah suggested. Arthur doesn't smoke, Melissa said with a tone as if Deborah's suggestion had offended her to the core. Well, maybe he got poisoned by oysters, Heather chuckled, and Melissa scotched her sister with a disapproving look. All right, go find him, Melissa ordered, and I'll stay here and wait. The dance is in 5 minutes. By the way, according to the schedule. Oh, they have a schedule, Deborah grumbled. Fine. Heather, check outside, and I'll work around here. Maybe he's hiding behind a column to avoid this dance. Melissa lightly punched her aunt on the shoulder. Deborah, not funny. Heather hurried outside. Maybe Arthur got nervous and forgot about this cursed dance. Or did he feel unwell? Mixing alcohol with who knows what. However, it wasn't right if he missed this crucial ritual for Melissa. The first dance. Heather stepped outside. 2 guests were smoking by the restaurant doors. But Arthur wasn't there. Where did he disappear to? Did he really decide to run away? Or did Melissa just get too nervous? And the moment Arthur stepped away for 5 minutes to the restroom, she decided to launch a search operation. Heather approached the guests. Hello. She smiled. Have you seen the groom? One of the guests, a pleasant man in his 40s, politely smiled in response. Arthur. Yes, he was here. I was surprised. He doesn't smoke. Then he went around the corner, alone. Heather was surprised. Why? Well, Not alone, the second man said. With some guy. I thought he was a guest, but I don't know him. What happened? Nothing. He just got lost. Heather shrugged. The bride is getting nervous. Your sister? The first man asked. Congratulations. And your mom isn't looking for a second son-in-law? He playfully winked at Heather, who struggled to refrain from being rude. No, thank you. Heather replied sternly. She's not looking. But if she decides to, I'll come straight to you. I promise. Heather looked doubtfully at the puddles. The snow had melted early, and the weather was slushy. She was wearing suede shoes, and they would get wet. All because Arthur decided to take a stroll when the first dance of the newlyweds couldn't wait. Cursing Melissa, Arthur, and all kinds of wedding rituals, Heather went in the indicated direction. She heard voices from afar. Two men were arguing about something. She peeked around the corner. In the darkness, Heather distinguished two silhouettes. One was Arthur. His black jacket, contrasting with the snowy white shirt, was immediately noticeable. The second man, slightly shorter than Arthur and quite stout, had his back turned to Heather. She couldn't see his face, only noting a noticeable scar running from the corner of his eye to the jaw. Calm down already. How much longer can this go on? The stout man said. Understand already. It's not working. Leave me alone. Arthur replied quietly. Stay out of my life. I've told you many times. It won't work. And you. Heather decided eavesdropping wasn't right and coughed loudly. The men fell silent. The bald one turned around, and Heather saw the scar on his right cheek. Arthur glared at Heather. What's the matter? He asked harshly. He frowned, and Heather was surprised. She had never seen such an expression on Arthur's face before. He was always so doll-like. And now, he looked at her as if she had caught him doing something indecent. Arthur, Melissa is looking for you, Heather timidly replied. The dance. Arthur smirked. I'm busy. So go away. Heather didn't immediately realize that his words were not addressed to her but to the bald man. Oh, go to hell. The bald man spat at Arthur's feet. He turned around and quickly worked past Heather. She stepped aside, nearly tripping. He grabbed her hand, preventing her from falling. Excuse me, the bald man grumbled. Goodbye. Heather watched him go. Who's that? She asked Arthur. His previous smile returned to his face. Oh, just someone who decided to spoil my holiday. You know. Pay no attention. Someone you know. Heather shifted from one foot to the other. The shoes were definitely soaked now. She would catch a cold for sure. Well, you could say that. Let's go. Arthur smiled even wider. My beloved woman has been waiting for me. Heather grimaced. Beloved woman. Imagine that. And why does Arthur disgust her so? They made it to the dance. Melissa rushed to her husband and hung on his neck. Have you forgotten? She almost cried. I was worried. You know. Yeah, I remember. Arthur kissed her forehead and put her down. Sorry for making you wait. The music played. Arthur and Melissa twirled in the center of the hall. The guests admired them, some with smiles, some barely holding back tears. Rachel sobbed on her husband's shoulder. He stroked her head and, judging by his expression, dreamed of the moment when he would finally be home. Heather approached Deborah, standing near the table with a glass of champagne in her hand. Heather, well done for finding him. Melissa was on the verge of tears. Deborah said, probably thought Arthur really ran away from her. Found another one right at the wedding and he was talking to some strange guy. Heather said, unpleasant, with a scar. Seems not a guest. I would remember such a face. Oh. What were they talking about? Deborah inquired. They argued. Heather shrugged. I didn't eavesdrop. Ha. I would have. Deborah laughed. Love dramatic stories. They returned home late. Almost midnight. Seeing off the taxi that took Melissa and Arthur to the airport. They planned to spend their honeymoon in Greece. I envy them. Deborah sighed, taking off her jacket. You know, I would also like a beautiful wedding. And a handsome husband too. Everything has its time. Heather took off her boots and wriggled her wet fingers. Oh, I'll catch a cold now. And I didn't like that man at all. Arthur? Deborah asked. No, not Arthur. The big guy Arthur was talking to. Well, the one with the scar. What could they have in common? Don't dwell on it. Deborah smiled. Maybe they had some work issues to sort out. Yeah. And he came to the wedding to settle the score. Right. Heather shook her head. Strange. Very strange. However, Heather didn't want to think about the bald man who argued with Arthur. She just wanted to get into the shower and warm up as soon as possible. Melissa's honeymoon went splendidly. She sent photos and joyful messages to her sister. Arthur seemed to be treating her like royalty, and Melissa felt absolutely happy. It looks like he's adding something special to her food. Deborah laughed. I've never seen her so ecstatic. Well, that's love, Heather replied. Honestly, I've never experienced that in my life. It's just something I don't quite understand. 2 weeks later, Melissa and Arthur returned from their journey. The entire family gathered at Melissa and Heather's parents' house. Melissa brought souvenirs, magnets, olive oil for their father, and cosmetics for their mother. She had a sun-kissed glow and looked even better than before. Heather felt a bit reassured. Arthur seems like a good guy. You can't distrust someone just because they're too perfect. Deborah continued to live with Heather, and it suited both of them well. Heather spent entire days at the music school, and Deborah took on cooking and cleaning. Heather felt like she had returned to her childhood when she and her aunt could chat for hours about anything and burst into laughter. The only discontent came from Rachel, who believed that Deborah should either get back with her ex-lover, move back to their parents up north, or simply move out of Heather's place. She thought Deborah was hindering Heather from building a personal life, but Heather had no one to bring home, and Deborah's company suited her just fine. 6 months passed. Melissa quit her job and became a housewife. Heather tried to dissuade her, but to no avail. Arthur wanted his wife to stay at home, and his word became law for Melissa. Rachel was pleased with this arrangement. She believed a woman's place was at home. She had worked as a secretary once, but after a short stint, a couple of years, she became convinced that a woman should stay home. According to her, it was a man's duty to bring home the bacon, and his wife should maintain the home fires. Vince, on the other hand, had no objections to his wife's decision. He always earned well and later started his own successful business. As far back as Heather could remember, her father loved to cook. Culinary arts were his main hobby. In the kitchen, he didn't just cook, he created. Her father constantly attended cooking courses, Italian, Japanese, Balkan cuisines, and he had a dream of opening his own restaurant. He assembled a team of like-minded enthusiasts, 3 young culinary school graduates and 2 homemakers who had excelled in custom cake baking. Then he rented a space, did the renovations himself, invested in advertising, and the business took off. Much to everyone's surprise, the restaurant became one of the most popular places in town. And then the business expanded. Vince started organizing banquets, weddings, corporate events. He brought everything needed on site and, along with his team, prepared delicious dishes that left no one indifferent. Heather sometimes envied her father's passion. He was literally on fire for culinary arts, knowledgeable about hundreds of meat cuts, and could talk for hours about spices. No wonder he achieved such success. He bought a nice house, gave his daughter an apartment, and acquired a couple of cars. Newspapers wrote about him, and he was invited to television. He was about to finish his first culinary book, for which a well-known publishing house had already paid. Heather hoped that sooner or later, she would find something that ignited her, made her evolve, and move forward. Once, she thought it was music, but it turned out she had no talent, just persistence. An average level, nothing extraordinary. Vince tried to involve his daughter in his business, handed her culinary books, and she even helped cook at some off-site events a few times, but she wasn't interested. She didn't understand why meat had to be cut a certain way and not crosswise, or why one had to use olive oil and not sunflower oil. And Vince gave up, but he never lost hope that at least one of his daughters would continue his legacy. Sometimes, Heather was haunted by a sense of guilt. It seemed she had let down her dear parents. Her mom had dreamt of her becoming a famous musician, and it never happened. Her dad wanted her to carry on his business, and alas, that too was a failure. There were few hopes for Melissa as well. The two things that interested her most in the world were cosmetics and romantic comedies. Poor dad. Now, if only Deborah were Vince's daughter, she could undoubtedly carry on his business with dignity. Intelligent, decisive, knowing what she wants, a perfect candidate. Even Deborah held such an opinion herself. Heather accidentally learned about it one evening when she returned from work, and they were having dinner in the kitchen. You know, everything seems wrong somehow. Unjust. Heather, Aunt Deborah suddenly said. What are you talking about? Heather wondered. I mean that things in this world don't distribute as they should. You know, somewhere people are starving, and somewhere good products are being wasted. Deborah said, poking at the casserole. I've been thinking about it for a long time. You decided to do charity work? Heather asked. That's a good thing. Deborah smirked strangely. No, it's just that, you know, your father, for example, a businessman, built his business from scratch. And who will inherit it? Yeah, we let him down. Heather laughed. Maybe if Melissa has a son, he'll inherit this business. What son? He'll be just like his mom. Deborah wrinkled her nose. Heather was surprised. Why is she saying that? Deborah never seemed to express disdain for her nieces. Seeing Heather's reaction, she quickly changed her tone. Heather, don't get me wrong, but you know, your sister, well, not very bright. Unless the child takes after the father and is half as smart. Asked the surprised Heather. Well, I think he's smarter. Deborah frowned. Oh well, sorry. I'm completely off topic. Just talking nonsense. I'm just in a bad mood. Melissa's behavior became increasingly strange. She didn't answer phone calls, and if she did, it was with short phrases. Heather started worrying about her sister. She even tried talking to her mother about it, but Rachel was confident that everything was fine. What did you expect? She got married. She has other priorities now, her mother would say. You, Heather, won't understand until you get married. If, of course, I live to see that happy moment. At some point, Heather couldn't take it anymore. She went to visit her sister. It was a Friday, and the music school sessions were over. Melissa opened the door quickly, looking surprised. Why did you come? She asked. I'm glad to see you too. Heather smiled. You've been missing, and I'm worried. Everything's fine. Melissa fidgeted, shifting from one foot to another, as if unsure of what to say. May I to come in, or should we just stand at the doorstep? Heather asked. Well, come in, Melissa sighed. What was going on with her? Who replaced her sister? Heather felt the urge to slap her. Melissa behaved as if Heather wasn't a close sister but someone she least wanted to see. Let's go to the kitchen and have some tea, Melissa suggested. Just until 5 o'clock. Then Arthur will be home. Can't he see me? Heather placed her hand on Melissa's shoulder and looked into her eyes with concern. What's happening? Nothing. Melissa tried to smile carelessly, and Heather immediately sensed it was an act. The smile looked feeble and unnatural. They sat at the table in the kitchen. Melissa placed a cup in front of her sister. And the tea? Heather asked. Melissa immediately slapped her forehead. Oh, sorry. Of course, right away. She took a tea box from the cupboard and returned to her place. So, Melissa, what's going on? Heather frowned. You don't seem like yourself. Melissa pondered, nervously playing with the delicate handle of the teaspoon from the wedding gift set. It's nothing, she finally said. It's just Arthur. He's a peculiar person, and I don't want to quarrel with him. All right. Let's start from the beginning. Heather placed the cup on the table. Her hands were shaking. Melissa, what's happening? Nothing's happening. Melissa shook her head decisively. It's just Arthur. He doesn't like guests. Guests in general. Or just me. Heather leaned over the table and gently pulled a strand of her sister's hair, as she used to do in childhood. Tell me everything. Melissa chuckled and tucked the strand behind her ear. It's nothing serious. He's tired from work. Comes home late. Doesn't want anyone around. That's all. Don't overthink it. Do you often have guests, or is it just me? Heather asked in surprise. Melissa hesitated. No, of course not. It's just, he asked me not to have guests if I didn't warn him in advance. And he also asked you not to talk to anyone on the phone, right? Heather guessed. Is that why you only answer with yes or no? I'm just tired. Melissa frowned. Heather, what's with the interrogation? Everything is fine with me. Just, I'm tired. Heather tensed. It seemed like her sister was about to break down. What was happening? Could it be that Arthur was mistreating her, withholding money, or involving her in some shady criminal activities? It's just sad that he started working so much. Melissa continued. He even disappears on weekends. It's sad. I clean the house, go for works, all alone. Okay, I don't like this, little sister, Heather said. You don't seem happy. No, everything will be fine soon. Melissa shrugged. He'll change his job. And what? Will he open his own agency? Melissa, no, he'll work with Dad. Melissa smiled. They're almost finalizing it. They didn't tell me anything. Heather exclaimed, but it's still in process. Melissa took a sip of tea and smiled. But Dad doesn't mind. On the contrary, he thinks Arthur could be his successor, inherit his business. And Arthur wants that too. He's a good manager. Besides, he has an excellent education. A proud smile appeared on Melissa's face. Yes, she definitely adores her husband. Or could it be that Heather has once again invented something for herself? Maybe everything is fine with her sister after all. Well, Arthur is working. Who doesn't? Many people don't like guests. Heather herself preferred to relax alone, at least until Deborah showed up. But Deborah respects others' boundaries and never engages in conversation if she senses that Heather is tired. Lately, Deborah has been busy with something, rarely at home in the evenings. Heather suspected that her aunt might be dating someone. Whenever she returned, there was a scent of men's cologne on her. All right, little sister. Heather finished her tea and smiled. Sorry for coming over so suddenly. I just worry about you. You understand, right? It's nothing to worry about. Just give me a heads up next time. Melissa stood up and hugged Heather. I missed you. Well, what can I do? I'm a married lady now. Heather kissed her sister on the cheek. Don't disappear. Suddenly, Melissa grabbed Heather's hand. Listen, Heather. Do you think he might be cheating on me? With whom? Heather was surprised. Do you suspect something? Well, I don't know. Melissa shrugged. He just disappears sometimes. Well, he's working. Heather smiled. He wanted to achieve a lot, as you yourself told me. Maybe he's preparing to join Dad's business. There's a lot to know there. Don't make things up. Okay, I don't know. Maybe I am making it up. Heather nodded sadly and rubbed her neck with her hand. It seemed that marriage didn't make her happy. Heather felt pain for her sister, but Melissa couldn't tell her to pack up and return to their parents. Besides, Mom wouldn't understand. Melissa, everything will be okay. Heather squeezed her sister's hand. Everything will settle down. Don't worry. Also, I feel like someone wishes him harm. Melissa whispered. What do you mean? Heather frowned. Who could wish him harm? Well, I saw a glimpse of a text message. They write to Arthur to stop something, but I don't really know what. He doesn't leave his phone. Melissa looked around as if afraid someone might be eavesdropping. Wait, have you asked who it is? Heather asked in surprise. Yes, I asked. Melissa nodded. He got really angry and said it was his business. "Melissa, if you're scared or feeling bad, you can come back. Return to our parents," Heather reminded her. "You're not obligated." No, everything else is fine." Melissa looked away. "But this is just bothering me." Heather returned home in a terrible mood. Something was definitely happening with her sister, and she didn't like it. Melissa seemed nervous and tense. Maybe it's just adaptation difficulties. They say the first year of marriage is the hardest. But if Arthur is really cheating, then Melissa can only be pitied. Heather never understood why people get married if they plan to date other people. Either choose one or be honest with yourself and don't get married. Deborah returned late that day. She mentioned having a meeting with a client for translating several large texts. Heather skipped dinner, waiting for her aunt. She wanted to talk to Deborah about Melissa. She thinks Arthur is cheating on her. Deborah tensed. Where did she get that idea? Well, maybe intuition, Heather explained. And he often comes home late. Oh, men are like that. Deborah laughed. We wait for them. Warm up dinner, worry. But for them, work comes first. Dad also worked a lot. But Mom never suspected or suspects him of cheating. Heather sighed. Yeah, Rachel thinks she's the center of the universe. Deborah squinted maliciously. And she needs the rest to serve her, including Vince. No, Mom is not like that, Heather argued. Oh, you just think so. I know her better. Believe me. Deborah raised her eyebrows. She clung to her husband and holds on. And what did she achieve herself? Right, nothing. She paints her pictures, lives in an ivory tower, and needs nothing. Deborah, she is still my mom. And your sister, Heather reminded. Sorry, niece, Deborah shook her head. But yes, I think so. Honestly, your mom is used to getting everything for her pretty eyes. I think it's unfair, even considering that she's my sister. But still, don't speak like that again, Heather warned. It makes me uncomfortable. Deborah pushed her plate away. Thanks. I'm not hungry. Deborah, I'm sorry. But I spoke the truth. Heather started getting upset. Yes, Mom was lucky. She met Dad. But it's not her fault. She married him when he earned little. Had no house, no cars, nothing. She found it and keeps it. Doesn't let go. With some inexplicable malice, Deborah stared at her niece. Heather felt uneasy. What's going on, Deborah? I don't understand you, Heather said quietly. And you won't understand. You're the same, Deborah shouted. Daddy solves all the problems. Gave you an apartment. Wanted to learn the violin. You learn it. Didn't have to work as a waitress to make ends meet during your studies. Like me. You think your mom didn't know? She knew. And do you think she helped? No, she didn't. Deborah, Heather frowned. They weren't obligated. Oh, go to hell. Deborah looked at Heather disdainfully. That's it. I'm leaving. I don't want to live with you anymore. I'm tired of it. Heather was stunned. What is this? Deborah, have you gone mad? She heard her aunt parking. Heard the front door slam shut behind her. And all this time, Heather just sat there, staring ahead. She didn't even think of stopping her aunt. Why bother? After those words she had heard. Yes, Dad worked like crazy. Mom took care of the house, the kids. She even managed the restaurant's accounts in the early days when Dad had to cut corners. She scrubbed floors and dishes. Deborah couldn't be unaware of this. A few days later, Heather went to visit her parents. She decided to talk to her mom about Deborah. Maybe there were some conflicts she wasn't aware of. They were in the kitchen together. Rachel was washing dishes left from dinner, and Heather diligently dried them with a towel. Of course, there was a dishwasher in the house, but Rachel claimed that washing dishes calmed her down. Mom, Deborah left. Heather began. Oh, well, that's good. Rachel glanced at her daughter. I didn't like her living with you. Mom, I want to ask you something. The girl stopped with a plate in her hands, not knowing how to start the conversation. You and Deborah seem to have strained relations. Why is that, huh? Rachel sighed deeply and turned off the water. There are reasons, honey. I'm just not sure you need to know. Mom, after such words, you have to tell. Heather smiled. What family secrets are these? Rachel looked seriously at her daughter and nodded. Nothing major, but there was an incident that made me realize I don't have a sister. I didn't want to tell any of you. Only your dad and Deborah know. Of course. Mom, what is it? Heather became frightened. Did she try to harm someone or what? No, dear. Rachel sat down on a chair. Not quite. She just tried to seduce your dad. What? Heather couldn't believe her ears. How is that possible? Well, she lived with us for almost 6 months then. Left some of her regular boyfriend. Rachel explained. Her tone was calm, even too calm. And I started noticing she roamed the house in very revealing robes. And everything revolved around my Vince. At first, I couldn't even think that something like that could happen. And then Vince said he wanted to rent an apartment for her. Without explaining anything. I argued, why spend money? Let her live. After all, she's still my sister. And Dad? Heather asked. And what about Dad? Rented an apartment. Called a taxi himself. Just didn't pack her things. Then he told me that she came to his office when I wasn't home. Started from a distance. You're probably tired. Vince, let me give you a massage. He kept refusing. But she took off her robe. What? Heather couldn't believe her ears. I mean, how? Just like that? Rachel smirked. She said, why does he need an old wife? Well, me, when there's a better option. Well, her. He yelled at her and told her to get out of the house. Said her feet should never be in our home again. Deborah got offended then. She threatened revenge, something terrible. But what could she do? And Dad told you this? Heather asked. Well, not right away. About 6 months later or so. Rachel waved her hand. Yes, it's all in the past now. But I couldn't communicate with her normally anymore. And probably never will. How can I communicate? She devised it all so well. Take away Vince. Get a wealthy man with a business and live happily. But how could she? Heather still couldn't believe her mother's words. It was simply unbelievable. Deborah, her aunt, and a friend. Heather, she has always been like that. Sighed Rachel. Mom and Dad just spoiled her, maybe too much. She's the late child. That's how it turned out. Deborah always felt like she deserved something extraordinary. And others get everything easily, undeservedly. Well, that's the result. And you still talk to her. Heather looked at her mother skeptically. Have you forgiven her? Well, she's still my sister. Rachel shrugged. After all, you can't just kick her out of the house. And Vince, he's a good guy. Didn't fall for it. I understand it was difficult. Deborah is a beauty. And me, I've grown old already. Mom, you're beautiful at any age. Heather hugged her mother, resting her head on her shoulder. Thank you for telling me. I had no idea it was like this. Why didn't you say anything? Well, it's our business. And your relationship with Deborah is your own. Rachel kissed her daughter on the forehead and then rubbed her nose against her hair. I knew she'd show her true colors. And she did. But why would she do that? She had rich men, it seemed. Why, Dad? Heather asked thoughtfully. Well, first, to bypass me. Rachel chuckled. And second, because Dad has money. Deborah occasionally hinted that we could help her more. You know, Vince to give her money, even when she was in college. But it was never enough for her, always wanting more. Well, one day your dad told her that he wasn't ready to support her. He has a family, 2 daughters. She got terribly offended, caused a scene, and imagine, Heather, with me, demanded that I influence him. I even talked to Vince, but he refused. Sent her money, but not much. He said she would start taking advantage. And he didn't want that. I would have never thought that. Heather said softly. She told me something completely different. Well, of course, She's always been like that, sighed Rachel. Manipulating her parents even in childhood, getting what she wanted. Okay, enough gossiping, darling. Let's go to the living room. Dad is waiting there. After Deborah left, Heather struggled to come to terms with what had happened. She would never have thought that her aunt was capable of such things. Was she really trying to seduce Heather's father? All for the sake of money. Maybe it's good that she's out of her life. Such things are unforgivable. And how could Mom do that? Allowing her into the house, letting her interact with her daughter and keeping silent. A few days later, Heather called her sister Melissa. She said that Arthur had gone on a business trip and suggested meeting up for a little work. Melissa gladly agreed. They decided to stroll through the city center, have coffee, maybe buy some new things and cosmetics. Seeing Melissa, Heather realized that something was wrong. She looked pale, with noticeable dark circles under her eyes, as if Melissa hadn't slept for weeks. Melissa, what happened? Heather asked anxiously. You look bad, dear. Oh, nothing. Just a bit nervous. Melissa forced a smile that seemed more like the snarl of a frightened beast. Heather, don't pay attention. Stop lying. You can't lie. Heather shook her sister's shoulder. Melissa, speak up. Melissa glanced around. I'm scared. What are you afraid of? Heather looked around too but saw nothing suspicious. Melissa, what's with all the mystery? Some man called me. He wants me to leave Arthur. She whispered. He called from an unknown number and spoke in a very scary voice. When? Heather asked in fear. Yesterday. I could hardly sleep after that. I'm alone at home. Arthur left. Melissa sobbed. I don't understand what's happening. I don't either, Heather said grimly. But we need to figure it out. Maybe someone was joking. I wouldn't joke like that. Personally, I wouldn't. Melissa frowned. People can be different, Heather replied, recalling her mother's story about Deborah. Maybe stay with Mom and Dad for now. It'll be safer. Melissa, Arthur said not to leave, that he'll handle it himself. Melissa replied. But I'm still scared. Okay. What did he tell you? Heather looked into her older sister's frightened eyes. Do you remember? Melissa fell into thought. But this man said that Arthur isn't who he pretends to be. That I should leave him as quickly as possible before he harms me. Heather, what harm can he do to me? These are just some nonsense. He's my husband. He loves me. Heather wanted to reassure her sister, but for some reason, it suddenly seemed to her that the strange man might be right. Melissa, let's go to Mom and Dad. Okay, I'll help you pack, and Arthur will figure things out somehow. But what if he gets upset? Heather, you know, it turns out that I don't trust him. Right. Melissa lowered her gaze. I wouldn't want to quarrel with him. All right. We won't tell him. Heather winked. So, little sister, let's go. But what will we tell Mom? Ha, Melissa asked. Let's just say you got bored on your own. Heather shrugged. I don't think she'll interrogate you much. As for that call, maybe report it to the police. Melissa turned pale. He said not to go to the police. That he'll do something. Good Lord. What nonsense. Exclaimed Heather. What is even happening? I don't understand. What are you talking about? Melissa was surprised. Nothing. Just ignore it. I'm just worried about you. Heather put her hand on her sister's shoulder and felt that she was literally trembling as if from cold. All right. Let's go get ready. If he calls again, record the conversation. Just in case. Okay. The rest of the day was spent helping Melissa pack her things and taking her to their parents' house. Rachel didn't ask any questions. Either she believed that Melissa was bored alone, or she simply saw her frightened and pale face. In the evening, Heather took a taxi home. However, she decided to take a short walk and clear her thoughts. She asked the taxi to drop her off in the city center, although she quickly regretted it, as it was cold, and Heather was wearing only a light windbreaker. Nevertheless, the cool air helped her gather her thoughts and even invigorated her. Just what she needed. Heather pondered. What does she really know about Arthur? He supposedly graduated from a prestigious university. I wonder if Melissa has ever seen his graduation diploma. Even if she has, such diplomas can be ordered online, and no one can distinguish them from the original. Typically, such things are revealed when a diploma is checked during employment. And Arthur has never worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Or maybe it's not about him at all. What if someone from her past decided to seek revenge and is now calling her, demanding Melissa to get a divorce? But who could be capable of such a thing? Not Nate with his delicate soul. Right. He's not capable of that. And enough time has passed since their breakup. It seems he's already married and doesn't remind her of himself. Heather thought they were friends. It turned out she had been envying her all this time and believed that Heather unfairly got her apartment. Yes, the apartment was a gift from her father when she finished her education. Heather was a bit shocked by such an expensive gift and even tried to refuse. But her father was adamant, and Vince decided to give his daughter an apartment and relieve her of headaches. Could Deborah be jealous of this gift? The apartment was tiny, just a one-bedroom. Heather furnished it herself, did the repairs, and hasn't taken a penny from her parents since she started working. She believes that's not how grown-ups should behave. Miss, wait. Behind Heather, a loud, deep voice resounded. She didn't turn around and quickened her pace, not wanting to engage in conversation with anyone. You dropped this, miss. Heather reflexively parted her pockets. The phone was in its place. Just a moment. A tall man in his 40s overtook her, breathing heavily as if he had been running, trying to catch up with her. Me? Heather was surprised. Of course, you. The man nodded. I tried to talk to your sister, but couldn't. What? Heather stopped. So, you're the one who called her, right? You. The man nodded. Yes, I called her, trying to catch her. But I couldn't. To catch her? Heather exclaimed. I'll call the police right now. What do you want from her? You scared her to death. Quiet. Quieter. He looked around. No need to attract attention. Suddenly, Heather understood. She had seen him before. Only now did she notice a scar on his face, as if someone had cut his cheek with a knife. It twisted from the corner of his mouth to his eyebrow, making his face eerie, almost inhuman. I'll scream, Heather warned. Well, you can scream. The man grimaced. But I need to talk to someone. Your sister is in danger, and maybe your whole family. I don't know what they're planning. Are you threatening me? Heather took a step back. Mind you, I'll go to the police and tell them everything. And my husband. You don't have a husband, the man calmly said. I gathered some information. Not intentionally. It just happened. Who are you anyway? Heather grabbed her bag with her right hand, ready to hit him on the head if necessary. Unfortunately, the bag was light, and it probably wouldn't cause him serious harm. But distracting him was a definite possibility. Distract and run. To the nearest police station, of course. If only she knew where it was. My name is Jerry. The man introduced himself. I used to date your aunt for a while, with Deborah. Heather was surprised. Do you have another aunt? He asked. Did you hit her? Heather squinted. She felt the urge to hit him as hard as she could. No matter what Deborah was like, no one deserved beatings. I never touched her. Not once. Jerry shook his head. Sorry, but that's how I was brought up. You can't hit the weak under any circumstances. Or what will I become? I saw her bruises. Heather stepped forward, and Jerry unexpectedly stepped back, as if startled. She told me it was you. Deborah always lied a lot. The man calmly replied. Didn't you know that? So, you've decided to enlighten me about her. Heather took another step, but Jerry stood his ground. Now they were almost touching each other. Heather felt uneasy. He was almost a head taller and seemed very strong. She probably wouldn't stand a chance in a physical confrontation. Well, you could say that. He smiled. and his face appeared even more frightening to Heather. "Listen, I just want to tell you something, and then we'll go our separate ways. Decide what to do with this information. I tried to warn Melissa. She doesn't want to listen to me. And now it's just you. And what do you want to tell me?" Heather crossed her arms over her chest, as if trying to protect herself. She held the bag in front of her, like a shield. If only she had a sword. "Has your father already taken Arthur into the business?" Jerry asked calmly. "How do you know?" Heather was surprised. "He told me about his plans." The man looked away. "Before? Well, never mind. So, you know each other?" Heather slowly lowered her hands. "Really, let's say we were acquainted before certain events. You know, it would be better if I start from the beginning, and the story will be long. I can tell you right here, or we can go somewhere warmer." Heather looked around. One cafe was still open. Its windows were lit, and people sat at the tables. The man followed the direction of her gaze. "Well, why not? Just extra ears, though. What does it matter?" He turned and walked towards the cafe. Heather stood in place. He glanced back. "So, are we going?" The girl nodded and quickly followed him. Although, perhaps, it would be wiser to leave right now and not listen to what he would say. Yet recent events made Heather think that it was better not to refuse. What did he intend to tell her? Moreover, there were people around, after all. Jerry was unlikely to try to harm her with witnesses. They settled at a corner table, away from the other patrons. Heather watched Jerry with concern, flinching at every loud noise. He, on the other hand, was entirely calm, even ordering coffee for her. He got one for himself to an espresso. The tiny cup disappeared in his large hands. Heather noticed a tattoo on one of his fingers, a few black dots arranged in a diamond shape. Apparently, he noticed her examining the tattoo. "It was a thing," he nodded. "Back when I was young. Did some time. Almost 20 years ago. Don't worry. I'm not involved in crime anymore. Don't plan to be. Had enough of that experience." Heather swallowed. "Got it. So, what did you want to tell me? Why are you scaring my sister?" "I didn't want to scare her." Jerry gulped down his coffee and placed the cup on the table. "I wanted to warn her. I found out about Arthur's plan too late. Can you start from the beginning?" Heather demanded. "Otherwise, I'll go crazy. If you think I often deal with such situations, you're mistaken." "I understand." He smiled, and this time his smile frightened Heather slightly less, almost human. Now she took a closer look at him. Jerry seemed around 40, stubble on his cheeks, a completely bald head. He wore jeans and a warm striped sweater, a cozy look, like a kind Canadian lumberjack. However, for some reason, Heather still felt uneasy. "So?" she asked. "So?" He cleared his throat. "The story is quite long. Jerry did indeed spend some time in prison. In his youth, he got involved with a bad crowd. They asked him to stand watch while they robbed a grocery store. It was his first and last crime. The police arrived. Everyone except Jerry scattered. He chose not to betray his friends. Those were the unwritten rules. Die but save your friend. For some reason, they decided to put Jerry behind bars, either to close the case or simply because he didn't appeal to the judge. His brief time in prison convinced him that he didn't want to go back there. There were also problems in his family. His father drank, and his mother drank with him. At first, to shield her husband from the worst of it, but then she got drawn into it herself. In school, teachers predicted that Jerry would end up in prison, having stepped onto a slippery slope. However, after school, Jerry surprisingly did well. He decided to change his life, not wanting to lose his freedom. He didn't want to live like his parents. After school, he joined the army. That's where I got this scar. He rubbed his cheek. "Did you fight at the war?" Heather asked. "No." Jerry shook his head. "Stood up for a guy. Nothing serious. got away with it easily. After completing his military service, Jerry returned home and worked at an auto repair shop for several years. He barely communicated with his parents, who were consumed by their alcohol addiction and showed little interest in their son's life. While financially supporting them and encouraging them to seek help for their addiction, Jerry gradually realized that true recovery is possible only for those who genuinely want it. His parents, however, denied having any problems. Jerry, who was earning a decent income and had even saved up for a small apartment, harbored a peculiar dream. To some, it seemed amusing and absurd. He wanted to own his own publishing house. Perhaps not a lucrative venture, but one that would be entirely his own. He envisioned publishing books by young authors, including poetry and children's literature. He traced the origins of this dream back to his time in prison, where he befriended a local librarian. Books became his refuge during those years, and he developed a deep appreciation for their transformative power. Although he lacked literary talent himself, Jerry saw the potential to help aspiring writers find their way. To pursue this dream, Jerry decided to acquire the necessary education. He enrolled in a printing college, becoming the oldest student in his class. It was during this time that he crossed paths with Arthur, who was finishing his studies. When Jerry was a freshman, Arthur was already in his senior year. Their friendship blossomed after a chance conversation in the smoking area, where Arthur revealed that he worked at the college's editorial office and invited Jerry to join. Heather, curious, inquired, "So, did he enroll in a prestigious university later on?" Jerry chuckled. "Prestigious university?" Melissa mentioned he graduated from a prestigious university and is a diplomat, Heather said. Jerry burst into laughter. "Ah, a diplomat? Ha, no, not a diplomat. But he always did love to lie." Arthur lied a lot, and often for inexplicable reasons, without any apparent benefit, just for the love of art. He would claim to have a very wealthy father living abroad, regularly sending him money. He'd say he was dating a model who lived in another city, and she was about to return to marry Arthur. Furthermore, he supposedly planned to move to another country where a renowned publishing house had already invited him. Jerry quickly realized that Arthur was shamelessly fabricating stories, but he didn't stop interacting with him. Arthur was charming, intriguing, and spending time with him was enjoyable. After college, Jerry landed a job in a small printing house, aiming to gain relevant experience. The printing house published works by less-known authors, printing newspapers and magazines. Jerry felt at home, enjoying what he did, even though his colleagues initially cast suspicious glances at him due to his appearance. He acknowledged that he resembled a movie gangster, but perceptions of him quickly changed. He loved his job, was willing to work overtime, adept at fixing malfunctioning equipment, and even began delving into the basics of design. Heather raised an eyebrow. "Indeed, you don't look like someone who loves books," she remarked. The man smiled. "I do, by the way, detective novels. McQueen, ever heard of it? It's a series, black covers with white letters." Heather nodded. "Yes, my dad reads them. He likes it. That's what we printed." He proudly looked at Heather. "A bestseller. Thanks to us, McQueen became popular. Well, not millions in circulation yet, but we're getting there. We also publish cookbooks. Are you into cooking?" Heather shook her head. "Not really." "No worries. I'll give you one as a gift," Jerry promised her, seemingly out of the blue. Suddenly, Heather found it amusing. Imagine that he loves books. Jerry continued his story. Arthur left town, and their communication ceased. They occasionally exchanged messages, but nothing serious was discussed. Arthur claimed to have found a good job, and Jerry pretended to believe him. Then Arthur returned, calling Jerry to say he had nowhere to stay, explaining that the company where he worked went bankrupt, leaving him without money. "Well, if you want, I can arrange a place for you with us," Jerry offered. "And the salary?" Arthur inquired. Jerry mentioned the amount. and his friend grimaced. How can anyone live on that? How, Arthur? Just like this. That's how I live. Jerry shrugged. It'll be more later. No, I don't need that. Arthur frowned. I don't want to scrape by and work for someone else. Money doesn't fall from the sky, Jerry philosophically stated. Arthur laughed in response. You just need to know where the money is and be there at the right time. That's all. Jerry found his friend's words strange. What other places? Maybe he'd experiment a bit, get disappointed in his fantasies, and start working like any normal person. Arthur would disappear for entire days, and Jerry didn't know what he was up to. Arthur claimed he was looking for work, and Jerry had no reason not to believe him. Probably, he was indeed searching. Look how hard he's trying. Dresses well, too. Where does he get the money for those suits? Jerry was amazed by his friend's ambitions. With his education, aspiring to a high position would be at least odd. Then Arthur said he had met a woman he loved and was moving in with her. Jerry didn't get introduced to the lover, which slightly offended him, but he didn't see the point in insisting. Apparently, Arthur had some reasons to postpone the meeting and hide the girl. Jerry accidentally learned from mutual friends that Arthur was living with a woman much older than him. Her name was Margot, a widow of some general, living on the inheritance left by her husband. And it was a substantial inheritance. Jerry believed that love knows no barriers and thought that couples where the woman is much older than the man could be perfectly happy. Margot was around 60, but she looked quite good. Of course, Jerry suspected Arthur of selfish intentions. But what business was it of his? Maybe everyone was fine with it. Wealthy women sometimes buy attention and care from young men to avoid feeling lonely. It's a perfectly normal deal. Arthur was indeed quite something. Polite, gallant, able to behave like a gentleman. He started driving a nice car, dressed like a male model from a fashion show, and even claimed to have earned the money himself. Allegedly, he had his own business selling items from China on some website. Naturally, there were few buyers, but Arthur got the chance to proudly call himself an entrepreneur. For a couple of years, they didn't communicate at all. Jerry continued to work at the printing house and was quite satisfied with his life. He became the deputy director and earned a decent income. And then he met Deborah, my aunt. Heather asked. Jerry nodded. Yes, her. Saw a beautiful girl, couldn't work past. Very likable, smart, and, of course, beautiful, he said dreamily. Apparently, in those times, he truly felt happy. Their romance developed rapidly. Deborah moved in with Jerry. He even renovated for her, exactly as she wanted. Light walls, minimal furniture, snowy carpets. It seemed not very functional to him, and cleaning took a lot of time. But Deborah was satisfied. After all, Jerry was the one doing the cleaning. Deborah couldn't stand cleaning and claimed she was allergic to all cleaning agents and even water. 6 months passed. One ordinary Saturday evening, Deborah and Jerry were at home watching a movie when the doorbell rang. It was Arthur. He looked furious. That scoundrel. Arthur shouted upon seeing Jerry. Who? Me? The man asked, surprised. No, you. Without waiting for an invitation, Arthur entered the apartment. Margot kicked me out and left me penniless. Why did she kick you out? Tell me, Jerry asked. What happened? Who's this? Deborah peeked out of the corridor. My friend. Jerry sighed. He's got some problems. Deborah smiled. Well, then I won't interfere. Jerry understood that he couldn't throw Arthur out. Besides, how would he feel if he kicked his friend out in such a state? Let's go. Jerry waved his hand towards the kitchen. I have some wine left, I think. Good one. Wine won't cut it, Arthur said grimly. It turned out that Margot did kick him out. Without warnings, without scandals. She just put him out with a suitcase. Arthur tried to find out what was going on, and at first, she didn't want to explain anything. Just kept repeating that his feet would no longer be in her house, Whether Arthur's charm played its role or his persistence, he eventually learned the reasons for her decision. "She hired a detective to spy on me," he declared indignantly. "Imagine. I thought she trusted me at least a little." "Well, what did she find out?" Jerry asked. "And what do you think?" Arthur said maliciously. "I lived with that old woman, and I wanted to communicate with normal young women. I'm a man, after all." "So, you cheated on her?" Jerry said in surprise. "Of course." Arthur rolled his eyes. "Anyone would have done the same. Only a normal woman would understand that it couldn't do without it, and would calmly accept what was happening. And she turned out to be proud. She even promised to rewrite the will, and she'll actually do it." "Will? Jerry chuckled. "And you find it amusing, huh?" Arthur glared at his friend. "You know, any normal person understands what was going on between us. I thought she understood it too, but she seems to have decided that we really have love. I actually wanted to spend the rest of her life with her." "Half her life, of course. But isn't it ridiculous?" "Not funny." Jerry sighed. "You know, I understand that there are situations where love, if you can call it that, is bought with money. But usually, such deals imply loyalty. I don't care what anyone assumes. This hag needs to be punished." Arthur poured himself more wine. "And what are you planning?" Jerry asked. "Are you going to seek revenge on her?" Arthur looked at his friend with serious eyes. And then, apparently realizing that he said something unnecessary, he forced a fake smile. "No, of course, I was joking." "What? We broke up. That's it. But things happen. Listen, Body, can you provide me with a place to stay? I have nowhere to go." Jerry, of course, accommodated Arthur for the night. Deborah was not pleased. Lying next to Jerry at night, she asked, "Is he staying with us for long?" "Darling, I don't know yet," Jerry answered quietly. "He's in trouble. You can't refuse to help. You understand?" She wrinkled her nose. "Well, it's too cramped for 3 people here." "Don't worry. It's not for long," Jerry promised her. However, Arthur had no intention of leaving. He claimed to be looking for a job, constantly borrowed money from Jerry, and continued to curse Margot for treating him so horribly. So they lived for 4 months. Deborah gradually stopped complaining about Arthur overstaying at their place. Then one day, Jerry returned home from work earlier than expected. Arthur and Deborah were together without any clothes on. Cliché and amusing. It was painful. Jerry struggled to contain himself. He didn't create a scene or get into a fight. He simply said he was leaving for a hostel for 3 days. And when he returned, neither Deborah nor Arthur should be in the apartment. During those 3 days, Jerry wandered around the city, drank, and contemplated what to do next. How could he deal with the betrayal of 2 people he trusted? Was he really that foolish? Did he deserve such treatment? Then he came back, and both Deborah and Arthur were gone. True, Deborah took the money he kept in a box in the closet. The amount was small, an emergency fund. Jerry handled this loss easily. As his mother used to say before descending into the abyss of alcohol, "Thank God she took the money. Better to get rid of such people, even if they take honestly earned money with them, than live in deception." It seemed to him that neither Arthur nor Deborah would reappear in his life. He immersed himself in work, renovated again to avoid thinking about that woman. He even started exercising. It helped him distract himself and not dwell on the betrayal. Deborah, his once beloved, and Arthur, his once close friend. A couple of months later, on the city news portal, he saw an article. Margot, the widow of a general, found dead near her own house. Of course, it was a coincidence. Arthur couldn't be involved. He wasn't like that. He wouldn't take such risks. But Jerry felt uneasy. What if his former friend did decide to seek revenge on his former lover? He dismissed these thoughts. No, Arthur wasn't that kind of person. Sure, he loved to lie, enjoyed showing off, invented tall tales about himself. But he wouldn't go that far. At the very least, it was too risky. And for what purpose? He was unlikely to gain anything from Margot's death. But he was wrong. It turned out she didn't change the will. She seemed to have just forgotten about it. Arthur inherited a quite impressive sum. Jerry found out about it accidentally from a former college classmate. He mentioned that Arthur got lucky. A couple of million in his pocket. The police had no suspicions, although many found it all strange. Jerry diligently pushed these thoughts about Margot's death aside. But why should he care? Let the police handle it. Yet, he couldn't completely forget this story. It seemed too much of a coincidence. Then Jerry ran into Arthur again. By chance. He was just walking home from work, decided to take a stroll, and saw him. Arthur looked bad. The sheen was gone, and his eyes were dull. "Hey, Jerry." Arthur smiled, seeing his old friend. Jerry wanted to turn around and leave, but for some reason, he changed his mind. "Hey, how's it going?" "Not great," sighed Arthur. "Heard about my inheritance. Poor Margot. I can't imagine who could do such a thing to her. I think it's her son. He's been wanting her apartment for a long time. I didn't even ask about it." Jerry responded, surprised. "Yeah, heard the story. I understand what you might have thought." Arthur wearily waved his hand. "They interrogated me thoroughly, drained the inheritance just to leave me alone. Didn't go as planned, did it?" Jerry asked cautiously. "And what did I want?" Arthur looked at him strangely, almost malevolently. "Do you have an opinion?" "No opinion," Jerry said gloomily. "That's good." Arthur nodded. "Listen, let's forget what happened. Have a seat. Chat." And Jerry agreed. No, he couldn't forget what happened. Of course. He was more curious about what Arthur would say. Maybe he'd accidentally blurt out something, and it would turn out he was involved in Margot's death. And he was also curious about what Arthur could say after everything that happened. They went to a wine restaurant. They served inexpensive but quite good wines. And Arthur had the strange ability to get drunk quickly. And Jerry was counting on that. But Arthur didn't say anything more about Margot. Even when Jerry asked him questions about her, he just evaded and changed the subject, which in itself seemed suspicious. But he talked a lot about plans for the future. "Have you heard about the Green Garden restaurant?" Arthur asked after the third glass of wine. "Yeah, I heard they cook delicious food there." Jerry nodded. "They even did our corporate table. There's this guy, with a mustache, the head chef. He cooks himself. You can tell he's a real professional." Arthur nodded. "Do you know that guy? A relative of Deborah?" "No." Jerry was surprised. "She never mentioned anything like that to me." "That's him. This guy, the husband of her older sister." Arthur chuckled foolishly. "Quite a coincidence. Very wealthy person. They have a house outside the city. Massive. Well, good for them, I guess." Jerry took a sip of wine. "They earned it. The kitchen there is truly amazing. Some people have all the luck." Arthur twirled the stem of his glass in his hand, looking thoughtfully somewhere through Jerry. "And his daughters are well off too. Practically did nothing and already rich. Convenient, isn't it?" Jerry understood that Arthur was drunk and talking nonsense. But it would be a shame not to take advantage of the situation. "Do you have any plans or something?" he skeptically asked. "What plans, buddy? What are you talking about?" Arthur laughed. "I'm just reasoning. Some people get nothing. Take you, for example. Alcoholic parents. You do everything yourself. No one helps. And these fools get everything handed to them. It always amazed me." "Well, what can you do?" Jerry remarked. That's how life is. That's how life is." Arthur mocked him. "And our task is to intervene in the course of life and change it as it suits us." "But you already intervened with Margot," Jerry hinted. Arthur gripped the glass so tightly that Jerry thought he might crush it in his palm. "There was nothing with Margot. It wasn't me." "Got it," Arthur quietly said. "And stop talking about her. I don't want to remember that old woman." Jerry smiled. "Sorry, but you know, Various thoughts crossed our minds. Don't need thoughts. Arthur squinted. You need to act, not wait for everything to fall into your lap. Got it. The conversation left an unpleasant feeling for Jerry. It seemed like Arthur had something in mind. Hopefully, he wouldn't be able to execute his plans. Jerry found information about Vince's family, the owner of the Green Garden. Even checked Heather and Melissa's social media pages. Yeah, Heather sighed. Nothing can be hidden these days. Feels kind of weird. You weren't hiding anything. To be fair, Jerry smiled. I just hoped nothing would happen. Well, maybe he blurted something out while drunk. I told you, Arthur always loved to embellish. Maybe he came up with some project that won't get off the ground. Not at first time. Right, then Jerry saw Melissa's post on the wall, announcing that she was getting married soon. And a joint photo with Arthur. Arthur had clearly transformed. A young aristocrat, no less. Excellent haircut. A smile like a Hollywood actor. Every woman's dream. Jerry didn't know if he should do anything. Maybe Melissa is genuinely happy. Perhaps Arthur has fallen in love with her. And the fact that he will join the family business is a common occurrence. It's quite normal for a son-in-law to help Vince, and then maybe inherit his restaurant. But Jerry didn't like something about all this. There was an unpleasant feeling that he had to intervene. But why? He has no relation to this family. And he has never seen Vince's daughters. Arthur is their problem now, and they should solve it. Well, Jerry thought he wouldn't dwell on it anymore. Yes, he messed up. Got involved with someone he shouldn't have had anything to do with. Why did Jerry even think that Arthur, who lied to everyone for no reason, would treat him differently? Then Deborah called him. She seemed strange to Jerry. She was being evasive, talking nonsense, laughing at random moments, then falling silent for a long time. Jerry thought she was probably drunk and was about to hang up. Then Deborah said, I'll be to blame if something happens to them. Right, with whom? Jerry was surprised. With Rachel. With her daughters. So I'll be to blame. Right, what are you talking about? What's going on? Nothing. She laughed again. I'm talking nonsense. Sorry. Deborah hung up. And Jerry understood. Arthur had planned something and had told Deborah, his lover, about his plans. He easily found out where Melissa's wedding would take place. She had posted about it on her page. Time was running out. Deborah called a day before the ceremony, and Jerry decided to come and talk to Arthur right at the wedding. That's when Heather caught them. I see, Heather said quietly after listening to Jerry. And you think he could do something harmful? I need to talk to Dad and Melissa immediately. So, you're saying Arthur killed Margot? I don't know about Margot, Jerry admitted. Maybe it wasn't him. But if you think about it and put together everything I know, he might have serious plans for your family and your father's business. It's better to intervene before it's too late. Jerry offered to work Heather home. She refused, but he insisted. It was late, and who knows what could happen. They worked in silence. Heather feverishly wondered about what to do next. Melissa, what have you gotten yourself into? Couldn't you find someone better? What if Jerry is lying, seeking revenge on his ex-lover and the one she cheated with? But I have to warn our parents. Heather continued to ponder. Let Dad decide what to do next. He's smart. Dad will figure it out. He will definitely figure it out. After saying goodbye to Jerry, Heather went up to her floor and entered her apartment. She felt tired, but she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep. She had been too nervous because of her sister and the encounter with Jerry. Heather took a shower, changed clothes, and messaged Melissa, asking if everything was okay. Melissa replied that everything was fine. How are Mom and Dad? Heather asked. Fine. Dad is asleep, and Rachel is in the kitchen, Melissa replied. Heather, not believing her eyes, stared at the messages from her sister, Rachel. Melissa had never called their mother by her name. None of them had ever done that. Melissa, please call. Heather requested. Her hands were trembling. "I've already gone to bed," the sister replied, "or whoever was pretending to be her. I'll call you tomorrow." Heather tried to call herself. The call was rejected. She jumped up. She was shaking with excitement. It definitely wasn't Melissa. Or was she losing her mind? Heather wrote again, asking her sister to call her. But Melissa didn't respond. Apparently, the person who was writing from her phone wanted to pretend that Melissa had gone to sleep. Heather hurriedly got dressed. Then she realized she could call her mother. But she didn't answer. Her father was silent too. Heather listened to the ringing tone and almost cried out of fear. Something was wrong, definitely. She had to go to her parents' house. Taxis didn't want to come. There were no available cars. Heather kept dialing her sister's, father's, and mother's numbers. Then she called Deborah. "What happened?" she wondered. "It's late, and I'm already sleeping. Do you know where Arthur is?" Heather asked with a trembling voice. "How should I know where your sister's husband is?" Deborah replied indifferently. "He slept with you, didn't he?" Heather yelled. "And where did you get that? Who told you such nonsense?" "Huh?" Deborah asked. "It doesn't matter, Deborah. Where is he? Is he with you?" But Deborah hung up. Finally, a taxi arrived. Heather gave the address and asked the driver to go faster. "Are you running away from someone?" The driver laughed. "No, I'm running late," Heather replied. Time stretched painfully long for her. It felt like they had been driving for hours, although no more than 40 minutes had passed. Finally, the car entered the village where her father's cottage was located. Heather hastily paid and almost ran, jumping with excitement, towards the house. The lights were on only on the ground floor. The bedrooms were on the second. Maybe Heather had just gone crazy, and everything was actually fine. How would she explain her late visit to her mother? She would surely think her daughter needed some kind of treatment. Heather decided not to ring the doorbell. It was better to take a risk and climb through the window in the backyard. Later, she would explain everything to her mother. What drove her to act this way then? Then what? Heather herself didn't quite understand what she was afraid of. But there was no time for contemplation. The girl found the right window, hooked the frame, and lifted it about halfway. Only she and Melissa knew that this window opened from the outside. A couple of times, they had forgotten the keys to their parents' house and entered this way, through the window. They decided not to tell their mother about it. The village was well guarded, and the alarm system worked properly. Heather struggled to climb over the windowsill and found herself in a small room adjacent to the kitchen. This was where Dad kept his numerous pots, pans, and other kitchen essentials. The light was off. She entered the kitchen. It was dark there too. Perhaps her reasoning was just clouded. Otherwise, she couldn't explain her behavior. Maybe Melissa was just playing a prank. And now she was peacefully sleeping in her bedroom. And Mom and Dad too. No. The light on the ground floor was on in the living room. It meant that Dad was either reading a book or a newspaper, sitting in his favorite chair. And Mom was sleeping. She always went to bed early. She believed it was beneficial for health and helped to preserve youth. From the kitchen, a wide, spacious corridor led to the living room. Heather tiptoed, thinking that she should have taken off her shoes. She'd soil the carpet and get an earful from her mom. No, she had definitely gone mad. "You shouldn't have done that." "Why?" She heard an irritated voice. It came from the living room. How shouldn't have? It was necessary. She knows something. Deborah. What is she doing here? Heather cautiously peeked into the living room. Two people were sitting in the chairs, with their backs to her. Deborah and Arthur. They were quietly discussing something. "It's almost done." You shouldn't have. Arthur turned to Heather in profile. "I'm tired. You know." "Nothing," Deborah replied. "It will be over soon." Heather pressed her back against the wall. It seemed to her that she was breathing too loudly, and her heart was beating too loudly too. What kind of business is almost finished? What, in the bedroom on the second floor? Passing by Arthur unnoticed was impossible. and she needed to find out what happened to her parents and her sister. What were these scoundrels plotting? Okay, I'll go, said Arthur. Just a little left. Heather looked around in fear. She had to do something. What if he's heading to the kitchen? There was a chair on the floor. Perhaps Dad was messing with the circuit to check something. The circuit was high above the floor, and a step stool or a chair had to be used. Heather took the chair and raised it above her head. Arthur was approaching her. She could hear his steps. Heather's heart almost stopped. He entered the corridor, and she abruptly lowered the chair onto his head. The man looked at her in surprise, with some childish resentment in his eyes, as if he didn't expect such betrayal from her. Then he fell to the floor. Heather pushed the chair away. She didn't know what to do next. She had never had to hit people before. She was always afraid to hurt anyone. And now this. What if he died? And then what? Is it you? Deborah rushed into the corridor. Arthur. What did you do to him? Who did you bring with you? Ha! Heather looked at her aunt and stayed silent. Oh, you scum. I thought you could be pitied. Deborah grabbed Heather's hand with unexpected strength and dragged her along. What are you doing? Heather screamed. What's happening? Why the hell did you come? Deborah turned to her niece, and Heather recoiled. Her aunt's face was distorted, resembling the snarl of some animal. Why couldn't you just stay at home? Ha! Is it Jerry? Did he tell you? Let go, Heather whispered. It's not too late. Where are Mom and Dad? Where's Melissa? Not your business, Deborah said. Oh, you could have stayed out of all this. Heather tried to break free, but Deborah held her too firmly. They approached the pantry where her father kept the food supplies. It only opened from the outside, and Heather knew it well. Get in, Deborah shouted. Or else what? Heather pulled her hand again. What will you do? In a swift motion, Deborah pulled a small lady's pistol from her jeans pocket. Heather had seen it before. It was a gift from one of her admirers. The woman claimed she always carried it for her own safety. This is what will happen. Go in, she ordered. Sit there quietly, and then we'll see. Heather realized that resisting had no meaning anymore. Deborah looked like someone capable of anything, including murder. She obediently entered the pantry, and the door slammed shut. Heather feverishly inspected the contents of the shelves. Cans of peas. Well, it seemed that Dad did have some supplies after all. Jars of pickles. Ham in jars. Well, at least she wouldn't die of hunger. That was certain. Scream. The neighbors probably wouldn't hear. Dad took care of soundproofing, and the neighboring houses were quite far away. Heather rummaged in her pocket. A phone. Deborah hadn't thought about taking her phone, but there was no signal. Heather didn't know how much time had passed. She walked around the cramped pantry, then sat in the corner, attempting to call the police. But the calls wouldn't go through. What kind of curse is this? She banged on the door. She screamed, but no one came and opened the door. Finally, Heather understood that there was nothing to do but wait. Someone had to come and open this damn door. They wouldn't keep her here forever, would they? Or would they? What if they set the house on fire? Or Deborah came in and shot her, completely defenseless? Heather looked around. Perhaps she could try to throw something at her. At least a can of peas. Why not? A can was heavy, at least. Suddenly, the door slowly opened. Heather grabbed the can of peas, ready to defend herself or at least attempt resistance. He stood against the bright light, but she immediately recognized him. Jerry. What was he doing here? Or was she just imagining things? No, it was him. Somehow, he ended up in their house. Unbelievable. Come out, he said quietly. Just quickly. Heather slowly stood up, still holding the can in her hand. Don't move. Deborah's voice rang out. She stood behind the man with a scar, holding something in her hands. Heather squinted. Oh God. Is that a gun? A loud sound. A blow. And suddenly it became dark. Unnaturally dark. A few seconds passed. She struggled to breathe, Her chest felt tight, and her head throbbed. It seemed she had hit her head on a metal shelf. Jerry stirred and tried to get up. His face was just a few centimeters from hers. He looked into Heather's eyes, then pulled away and sat across from her, rubbing his shoulder. Heather looked up. Deborah stood behind him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Deborah," Heather whispered softly. "Please, don't." "What's there not to do?" she cried. "It's all ready. It's too late. Nothing can be done now." Jerry stood up, swaying like a drunk. Heather also clumsily stood up, holding onto the shelf. Deborah stood there, sobbing like a child who had lost her favorite toy. "Why all of you?" she desperately asked. "Why?" "Enough." Jerry took a step towards Deborah. She raised the gun and aimed it at him. "Enough. They're already coming here. It's not worth it." She sobbed again. "I didn't want to," she whispered. "It was him. Arthur said we had to do it. I didn't want to." "I understand," Jerry replied gently. "Just calm down. Let's sit down and talk. You're not to blame. I know he forced you." The woman nodded, then threw the gun on the floor. "I really didn't want to." Jerry embraced her shoulders. Astonished, Heather saw Deborah's body suddenly relax, hanging on Jerry like a limp doll. "I didn't want to. Didn't want to," she sobbed. It turned out Jerry had deceived them. He didn't manage to call the police. Heather did it herself. But first, she went upstairs to the bedrooms where her parents and Melissa were sleeping soundly. Despite her efforts, she couldn't wake them up. Later, Heather found out that a significant dose of sleeping pills had been added to their dinner. She also learned that Deborah was the one behind it all, supposedly coming to her relatives for dinner by chance. The plan was simple. Melissa and her parents would fall asleep, forgetting to turn off the gas on the stove. It was cold, and the windows were tightly closed. Deborah and Arthur hoped that everyone would attribute it to a tragic accident. However, the plan failed when Heather arrived. Then Jerry came, to whom Deborah made a strange confession over the phone. She wanted him to know she didn't want to do anything wrong. Jerry suspected that she and Arthur were up to something, and decided to go to Vince's house, either to lie or tell the truth about the danger he was in. He didn't exactly know what he would do while driving on the night highway in his car. As it turned out, Jerry was not wrong. Heather didn't understand why Deborah called her ex-lover. Perhaps her conscience awoke, or she was genuinely torn apart. On one hand, there was envy and a painful, passionate love for Arthur, and on the other hand, the lives of her sister and niece. Apparently, she didn't really want the deaths of her close ones, but simultaneously desired to seize their property. However, why did they spare Heather? Deborah later confessed in court that Heather was the only one she managed to befriend. She persuaded Arthur to spare the girl's life, but everything went awry from what was planned. Heather was puzzled. Could it be that, despite planning so many details, they didn't anticipate someone intervening? Jerry was probably right. Arthur was both foolish and overconfident at the same time. However, these two qualities often coexist. The less you know, the less you doubt your own righteousness. 2 months had passed since that dreadful night. Heather's parents, Rachel and Vince, along with her sister Melissa, spent a considerable amount of time in the hospital. The dose of sleeping pills turned out to be so significant that they suffered serious poisoning. Deborah confessed everything to the police about their plan to send her relatives to the other side, and that the idea originated from Arthur. He remained hopeful of getting rich quickly without putting in any effort. Fortunately, he failed. Melissa struggled to recover for a long time. She spent days crying, asking for forgiveness from her parents, blaming herself for what happened. But gradually, she began to calm down. Heather reassured her that she was not to blame for anything. Arthur was charming, cunning, skilled at gaining trust. Gradually, life began to get back on track. Christmas was approaching, and Heather, as usual, went to visit her parents. The three of them were busy in the kitchen, while her father sat by the television. This time, they decided not to involve him in the sacred process of preparing for the festive night. Heather, go get the peas, Rachel requested. I hope Dad didn't forget to buy them. Dad definitely didn't forget, Heather replied. Melissa, why don't you go? I don't want to go to that pantry again. Melissa nodded. Okay, 5 minutes. By the way, we're expecting a guest. Rachel looked at her daughter, still slicing pickles. I thought it would be nice to invite him. Who? Heather tensed. Last time, a guest somewhat ruined our lives. If you remember. Mom, I remember, Rachel sighed. Well, who would have thought, right? Thankfully, he's behind bars now. Such people shouldn't be working among us. Yeah, they shouldn't, Heather confirmed. So, who are we expecting? You'll see, dear. Mom winked. You know, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Another suitor, perhaps. Heather grimaced. 2 years ago, they already tried. What was his name? Andrew, your friend's son. I almost went crazy out of boredom, especially from his stories about trench digging in World War I. Come on, Mom. Oh, don't start. Okay. Rachel laughed. And it's a shame, by the way, that you didn't like Andrew. Such a nice boy. Yeah. You said the same about Arthur. Melissa mumbled, returning with a can of peas in her hands. The doorbell rang. Heather, will you get that? This person really wanted to see you, by the way. Oh God. Not this. Heather sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. Well, okay. Mom, I'll never forgive you if it's our dear Andrew with his trenches making a comeback. But it wasn't Andrew. Standing at the doorstep was Jerry, holding colorful bags, apparently with gifts. Hello, he smiled. Your mom invited me, so here I am. Hope you don't mind. Heather laughed. Not at all. Come on in. He awkwardly entered the hallway. I just couldn't refuse. Got tired of spending Christmas alone. And to be honest, I wanted to get to know you better, but I never mustered the courage. Heather, did you really climb into the house through the window back then? Jerry asked. Yes. Heather took the bags from him. I can even show you which window. And Heather thought that this time her mom didn't make a mistake in